definitely in the lead here. But let's get started with something I'm very curious with, which is Chia, its place in the world and its value. So, Bram, what can you tell us about that?
So standard Chia pitch. Bitcoin has this operation called mining, which involves burning a whole lot of electricity doing nothing. That's a little bit flippant. There's this interesting question of what is security worth? How much should security cost? It shouldn't cost nothing, but it shouldn't cost the entire value of what it is that's being secured, which is more or less what Bitcoin winds up doing in its mining process. So this is kind of horrible. But the thing is, Bitcoin is a secure distributed database. Being able to have a truly secure distributed database is a sufficiently miraculous thing that you take what you can get for it. But it would be nice to be less wasteful for this. So in order to do this, you kind of have to thread the needle very carefully. You need to figure out some resource that's already being wasted in mass quantities in the world and leverage that without burning electricity. And in fact, without even allowing people to burn electricity in the process of doing that. Now, while it would be really nice to be able to design a system which is powered off of human beings solving useful CAPTCHAs, which they can do in the background without really thinking about it too much, no such proof of work algorithm exists. But a minuscule step in that direction is proofs of space. There's a lot of storage capacity in the world. It's very over-provisioned. It's 100% commodity. Space is space. And there's also a lot of it being taken offline, end of life at all times. So if you can leverage that stuff both before and after the useful lifespan of storage capacity and do so without burning any electricity or burning very little electricity, then that's a much less wasteful and in fact much more secure system. So I figured out how to do that using all kinds of cool math, had to invent couple new mathematical primitives. VDFs weren't a thing before. Proofs of space weren't a thing before. The consensus algorithm of how it's all hooked together is super interesting. But yeah, threaded that needle. So we have working proofs of space and time, actually. And it requires verifiable delay functions be thrown in there as well. On top of that, in addition to making a better consensus algorithm, we've also made a much better on-chain programming environment. Very much based off of Bitcoin's approach, actually. Kind of in cryptocurrency programming, you really have these two approaches. There is the Bitcoin approach, which is in the UTXO model, which is very nailed down and clear and auditable, and you know what you're doing, and it can't do very much. And then there's the Ethereum approach, where it's fully Turing complete and has very rich data, and you just write stuff in JavaScript that's run on the blockchain and cross your fingers that hopefully nothing horrible happens. But this in principle supports everything, sort of messily and badly, and with auditability being a problem, which has caused billions of dollars worth of Ethereum to get bricked due to just outright bugs, which is not a good thing. But in principle, supports more. So I figured out some tricks, and we built a system where it's possible to, within the confines of what is essentially the UTXO model, within the coin set model. So all your full nodes have to worry about is what are the current pending coins that are not spent, just what is the set of them. And with everything being super auditable and nailed down, and the amount of state that you need to remember in order to keep track of everything is pretty small, it's still possible to have the full gamut, the full power of Turing complete programming with arbitrary logic being supported. Yeah, so this is super neat. Tricks to allow that to happen is a whole bunch of like self-referential programming things. The language that you write in is this very pure Lisp called, well, the underlying thing is CLVM, the higher level language that you can write stuff in. We call Chia Lisp. It's sort of the functional equivalent of brainfuck because it's a language meant to be self-referential. It's, for people who thought Scheme was just way too complicated. But it's extraordinarily powerful if you use certain tricks. And we have built prototypes of a number of things and have all kinds of crazy plans worked out for the future. Because when everything is a coin, it's kind of like in Unix, everything is a file. It makes everything interoperable with each other, in addition to being very auditable. So that enables all kinds of powerful stuff. Yeah, that's the high level pitch for Chia.
Okay. So I'll take a few more that are about Chia and cryptocurrency. Johannes Schläger asks, can you imagine a cryptocurrency which is not based on limited resources, such as proof of work or proof of space?
Oh, so cryptocurrencies, well, real cryptocurrencies, not things like Ripple, but cryptocurrencies are secure distributed databases. That's like really an extraordinary thing. So in order to make a secure distributed database, that sounds like an oxymoron. Like, how can it be that you can't just have an attacker just have a whole bunch of peers join the network and outvote everyone else, right? So people try to do these proof of stake things, but those are kind of a step back. Those are not really that distributed. Those are just kind of hiding who's running stuff or allowing them to sort of kind of join and leave. But if you have a proof of stake system, there are validators. There is a set of people running it. If they all leave, the system fails. So proof of stake is actually a step backwards in that sense. A proof of work system is really amazing in that everyone running it today, all the Bitcoin miners out there today, could just leave. They could just disappear. A whole new set of people could come in and start running it, and it would chug along. It would move forward. It would not be a big deal. This is based fundamentally on this core idea, Satoshi's wonderful, horrible idea, which is that you have a blockchain, and it has weight. It has a certain amount of blood, sweat, and tears that went into generating this blockchain. And for Bitcoin, it's the simplest thing you could do, which is it's based on partial hash collisions. So if you go to the right place in the Bitcoin blockchain, you can actually find derive a pre-image whose SHA-2 hash starts with a huge number of zeros. In fact, the number of zeros that starts with is a pretty good proxy just in and of itself for the total work that's ever been done in Bitcoin. I should really go find. At one point, I found what had been the best one of those up to that point, and I tweeted it, which was pretty funny. So I have a fast computer that I use to find us. And actually, because Bitcoin is using double SHA-2, it's a pretty short string. I really, at some point, have been meaning as an art project to go find the best one of those and get printed out on in a frame the pre and post image of that string. And put a price tag of $10 billion on it. And just the price tag is part of the piece of art. Anyway, you need this kind of proof of something because otherwise anyone could come in and just make something that alleged that it itself had greater weight than the actual thing does. And so you can't avoid that. There needs to be a thing there. You can almost sort of kind of fudge it a little bit. There's this interesting construct of proofs of time, which require a certain number of iterations to do. So And there, everyone's about on even footing. The fastest one in the world is going to be about the same for everybody. You can get faster hardware for it. Unfortunately, if you have a system that's pure proof of time, that's extremely centralizing. Whoever has the one very, very fastest one by a completely marginal amount is going to be ahead of everybody else. So you can't have proof of time be hero of the show, but it does help with something else, which is why Chia is proofs of space and time. They're kind of stitched together in this way, where the proofs of time help with a bunch of the potential technical issues with proofs of space and really kind of fix them. But yeah, you need some resource in there that when you look at the blockchain, you're validating the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that went into it. And the one that had more blood, sweat, and tears go into it is the winner. It's really this very Marxist thing. It's kind of strange how these people who claim to be uber libertarians are promoting these extremely Marxist theories of value about Bitcoin.
Martin Kovrigo asks, what could be the next big thing after Bitcoin? For the purpose of this question, I define the next big thing as the acceptable novelty that will make early adopters insanely rich and that should be popularized early in the rationalist circles.
Oh, well, I'm working on my own project right now, obviously, and I'm very excited about that. I'm not one to say, oh, you should invest in this, it'll make you rich. I find asset prices really uninteresting and boring. I do not care about the infantile obsessions of the marketplace, but I really do like working on secure distributed databases. So I'm having fun doing that. And I think my project's worth watching.
Okay. Oleg Stroganov asks, what's your take on Filecoin?
Filecoin is weird. At a fundamental level, it's like Mojo Nation isn't going to happen. Stop trying to make Mojo Nation happen. So 20 years ago, in the year 2000, I was an employee at a project called Mojo Nation. Mojo Nation was basically a cryptocurrency in the sense of, I mean, if Ripple's a currency, Mojo Nation it was a cryptocurrency. It was before its time. Mining hadn't been invented yet. We didn't know how to do swarming distribution. It was trying to do too many things. There were like the economics of how to do coin distribution hadn't been worked out. Having a separate test net wasn't yet a thing. Almost everything that happened in peer-to-peer afterwards, outside of like VoIP, but like Bittorrent was me just leaving that project and going, okay, I'm going to work on the one interesting thing that came up here based on my experiences and do that. And like Satoshi's separation of mainnet and testnet actually directly came from some advice that a bunch of academics had, having studied the failures of Mojo Nation. So almost everything that we see today in cryptocurrencies is directly descended from Mojo Nation. But Mojo Nation was trying to make a marketplace among its many failures. It was trying to make a marketplace for storage and bandwidth and such. And it had this big problem that, well, two big problems. Number one, at least at the time, the value of bandwidth was much, much greater than the value of storage, just stupidly greater. So doing remote storage wasn't worth it because sending the data there and retrieving it back later just lost you money compared to the storage. Number two, and this is kind of a deep problem. Everyone wants archival for their storage. They don't want something that's going to be around for a month. That's not useful to them. They want things that are going to be around for years. And when you have a complicated tech stack, you can't guarantee that. The chances that all the data will be lost just because the whole tech stack gets abandoned is very high. You're not going to get that below like 10% or something. And people don't want a 10% chance that their data just magically disappears in a couple of years from now. That's just not a good service. It's not interesting to people to use that as a service. This is going to use a fundamentally crappy service. So trying to mix in storage is not a great idea. If you're using catalytic proofs of space, like the primitive that they're using, that's that does have potential to be a little bit more useful, but in a very different way. That I mean, they're kind of doing it wrong because they're trying to mix in this like storage service that's just a bad service, and they're doing it in a way that's really weird, and they're mixing proof of stake and this catalytic proof of space. It's just bizarre. Anyway, the underlying primitive that they're using, there is sort of kind of a thing that you could do. That you could allow people to like take their own archival data, which they just don't need to access immediately, and do proofs of space off of that while keeping the original data around, basically, so that when they want their data back, they can just get their data back and stop mining off of it. That's not what Filecoin is doing. That has a problem that the proofs generated are malleable, which causes a lot of other problems. But yeah, that's not what Filecoin is doing. Filecoin is trying to provide a service that's just kind of crappy, that's failed over and over again over time in the marketplace. If people just don't want to use other people's crappy, untrusted storage. The bandwidth is a little different, like for Bittorrent, because you can succeed at sending data somewhere, right? You move the data from point A to point B. Right now, it's done. It worked. Yay. Where archival storage is not something you can guarantee at the moment, right? There are things where you just can't win, right? You can guaranteeing that the data is archived, you can't guarantee, right? Guaranteeing that. I mean, you can sort of kind of guarantee, but it's really, really hard. Guaranteeing that you haven't been hacked, that someone else hasn't stolen your credentials, you can never really win that. All you can do is say, well, as far as we know thus far, we haven't lost. And, like privacy is even worse. Privacy is horrible, which is probably why a huge fraction of the people who work in privacy have drinking problems, because that's a battle that you can never not only never win, you can never be sure that you won't retroactively lose everything that you've ever tried to accomplish in the past. And it's very, very easy to screw up. So yeah, that's my high-level rant about Filecoin and a bunch of other things as well. Although Filecoin is also just weird about a whole long list of other ways that have nothing to do with its fundamental decisions. It's just strange.
Okay, let's run with a few more cryptocurrency questions, and we can also do other topics.
Yeah.
Tom Lubinow asks, could something like proof of latency or proof of availability work or not, or why not?
No, because you can't generate a proof of them that can be validated later. They don't have this property that you can make a blockchain where someone can look over the blockchain and over like years of the blockchain and calculate a weight for it and say, oh, yeah, that's good. There's just no way of producing later evidence for that. Although when you're doing proofs of time, that's kind of throwing latency into the mix, but you're using it to like secure proofs of space to stop people from just regenerating their plot files over and over again, which is important for there. Yeah, there's like, it's so hard to get a proof of work algorithm to work properly for Nakamoto consensus. Like I don't call proof of space really proof of work, because they are somewhat materially different, because they do involve these proofs of time, and it's just kind of different, but it's still Nakamoto consensus. It's really hard to get something proper for Nakamoto consensus to work. It needs to be that you need, these resources that are out there. It needs to be that everyone kind of has equal access to these resources. It needs to be that the problems that you're finding solutions for, that like when you find it, that there's not like near solutions and then better ones close to them. That's an important property for it to have. It needs to be scale free. It needs to be that if you double the number of resources you're putting into it, you need to exactly double the amount of good answers that you get along with it. It needs to be that the distribution of quality of answers is this nice exponential thing. It's really, really hard to get something that meets all the criteria that you want to have.
Okay, Jorge Spurua would like to ask about ChiaList.
Yeah.
And in particular, what are its advantages over Ethereum Solidity?
Oh, so the big difference turns out to be how your on-chain state works. So in Ethereum, in Ethereum, you have this like very rich on-chain state that's in JavaScript and stuff, and that's just hard to nail down. It's just kind of weird. In Chia Lisp, in the CLVM, in Chia, everything's just coins that just have their state. And also, all transactions happen simultaneously. That last one actually proves to have all kinds of crazy benefits. In particular, it's like makes a lot of natural resistance to miner extracted value. So if you have like bids and asks that are being put together, right? A miner in Ethereum can just move the price up one way and then execute against the other side of those, and then move it back the other way and then execute against the other side all the way back down, and just pocket the spread, right? In Chia, you can have a price oracle that has no security on it. It just like literally doesn't have security. It just says a price, but it's set up so it only says one price per block. So everybody knows they're getting the same price when one miner comes in and does something. So the miner can still manipulate the price off the true price in one of two directions, but they can't do both at the same time. They can't outright pocket the spread. They can take the other side of the extrema and make money off of that potentially, but they can't go both ways. That's a very cool feature to have. That's actually on top of a bunch of other things that are very cool. Like you have offers. So if you have a colored coin, it's not obvious that you can make a colored coin in Chia, but it turns out you can. That there's this thing. It turns out I'm mixing jargon here, so no one knows what I'm talking about. But it turns out you can implement capabilities as backwards pointing covenants that point backwards in time. That's like the big trick that makes it possible to actually implement colored coins in this crazy model, which makes it look like you can't do anything. But take it from me, you can in fact implement colored coins, and they're done in a way which has this great thing where you can make an offer. If you want to trade some Chia for a colored coin with somebody else, right? So I want to buy a certain amount of a colored coin in exchange for a certain amount of Chia. So what I do is I make a partial transaction, an offer, which burns a bunch of Chia and prints a bunch of the colored coin. And this is not a valid transaction by itself, because you can't just print the colored coin. It's security of it does not allow for that. But what I can do is I can take this and I can send it to somebody else. I can email it to someone. I can post it on Reddit. I can do whatever I want with it. And I'm not really exposing myself from a security standpoint. The worst that can happen is somebody else takes my offer, right? They can then, someone with no interaction from me can make the other side of this offer. They can take it. They can print a balancing amount of Chia and burn a balancing amount of the colored coin and then mix these together. And because they net out to zero on both sides, maybe minus a transaction fee, this is now a valid transaction that will actually go through when it's introduced to the blockchain. And it's in fact possible to market make. If you have a whole bunch of offers, you can mush them all together, take some of the spread, post it to the blockchain, it'll all go through. This is very, very cool. It means that anything that's tokenized in Chia immediately has over-the-counter trading, that you don't have to worry about it. There's no complicated, how do I set up a marketplace here? And it means that like automated market makers like Uniswap can be done much, much better in sort of these like mixed models where you have like a market maker who's a little bit trusted in that you're trusting them to not pocket the spread, but you're worried that if they have the ability to just really make off with the goods, that because they're escrowing everything, they'll go ahead and do that. There's a lot of hints that a whole bunch of these trusted exchanges have sold off a bunch of these cryptocurrencies that they're supposed to be sitting on. Not quite Mt. level yet in most of these, but definitely scary. It's much better to have a non-custodial exchange where you send your offers to the exchange, and the exchange is supposed to be kind of finding you a good price, but the exchange simply does not have the ability to steal your money. So that's that's possible. And then on top of that, like an exchange that's slightly trusted here, people can still come in and help the exchange have liquidity by depositing their funds for the exchange to use. So lots of really great features in the direction of price discovery and just general security and making markets a lot more liquid. People in the Ethereum community seem to just not know what finance is about. Like, they make these projects and the very first thing they do is make a price oracle. It's like, no, wrong. Price discovery is job one of finance markets. If you say, oh, we'll just have a price oracle, you don't know what you're doing. Then it all becomes a game of finding artifacts of the oracle, even if they're good people in some sense. They're not perfect. They don't have magical abilities to know everything in the universe and make a perfect price. And the whole game is going to be about finding artifacts of them. So you really want a system that's all about price discovery as job one, and integrating that into the market as a whole. Every time anyone does anything that is helping discover the price, and that needs to be integrated into the system as a whole.
Okay, let's ask some questions on another topic. We can maybe come back to this later. But David Mannheim asks, are there any design decisions in Bittorrent that in retrospect you would change?
Small things. Like, it doesn't use a tree. It uses a whole list of hashes, which is kind of annoying, because if something uses a tree, you always have the option to give a whole list if you feel like it. So that was kind of silly. There's a really interesting thought that I like that other people seem really not excited about. People talk about using error correcting codes for BitTorrent, and in the early days of it, a whole lot of academics were like haughty, like, oh, well, Bram doesn't know what he's doing. You could add error correcting codes here and make it work better. And that's not, it's not quite so simple. I damn well knew about error correcting codes in making it. You have this problem that you can't get around information theory, right? If I've downloaded X bits, if I'm uploading to somebody else, I'm going to send them X bits, and there's nothing more useful I can send to them. Just because of information theory. No amount of error correcting codes is going to help with this problem. And so doing rarest first helps a lot. There is a scenario where it's possible to do better than this, where there's a scenario sort of possible to do better. So if you have an original seed of the thing and you have 3 people downloading, right? All at once. And let's say they upload really slowly. So they're really just downloading from the seed. And they all join at once, and they all download half the file's worth of data, right? And then the seed leaves, okay? If you're doing rarest first, you're just kind of fucked in this situation. There's going to be blocks that you can't recover. In principle, with error correction, you don't really have this problem. You can fix it. And this is kind of nice, because you can actually say, well, we're going to use this very simple error correcting code, which is a 2 of 3 error correcting code. It's called XOR, okay? So we're going to take blocks, put them into pairs. And so each pair actually correlates to 3 things, A, B, and A XOR B, right? And when we tell people what we have, we tell people, you know, do we have A or B, or the XOR, or both, or neither, right? So that's 5 possibilities per this unit, right? And no, 1, 2, 3, no, 4 possibilities for unit. Okay, so, and then this makes it so when you're getting your hashes in advance, that it's not really that many more things. That you have the A hashes, the B hashes, and then the A XOR B hashes, so you can validate these things as you get them. This is really nice, but usually when I explain this to people, it just sort of convinces them it's not worth doing because the scenario which it helps with isn't all that super amazing compelling. I think it's pretty neat. Further building on it, there's a question of what can you do more that's easy with error correcting codes. This is a thing that's really fun. Let me see if I remember this correctly. You can, if you draw up a chart, right, where you have A, B, A XOR B, if you make this instead of 1 bit, it's 2 bits, you can add another column to it. And you can just sort of manually work through, and you get this weird, funky, kind of asymmetric looking thing if you just manually fill out things to figure out another column that you could add if you go from 1 bit to 2. So you fill in your A values, the 4 A values, fill in your 4 B values, right? And you fill in your AX or B values, right? And then you can say, what other column can I add here such that it will allow 2 of 4 instead of 2 of 3? And then you can find one. And for a long time, I wondered, what is this? Right? Like I knew it. Actually, Ray Fulvine pointed this out because he did this. And I was wondering first, what is this? So eventually, somewhere around, I don't know, 10 years ago, I actually was like, okay, I need to figure out what this is. I figured it out. Let's see if I remember this correctly. I think it's a polynomial modulo thingamabobber that you're, it's A plus something times B is what's going on in this like polynomial reduction. It's like a normal error correcting code thing. And I believe there are 4 of them. You can add a whole bunch more columns, it turns out, all at once, because it's A. So the original things were A, B, and A plus B, and then the other ones are A plus B times some coefficient. It's in Galois fields. You're multiplying the other thing by different values in Galois fields. So in that case, you have 4 of them, and then there's a 5th value because there's no 0. So it's A plus B times 2, A plus B times 3, and then there's just B with no A. And A plus B times 0. Yeah. So that's kind of a fun extension to that nobody knows about. I don't think anyone's ever going to use it. I think it's cool. But the XOR error correcting code in general in life, if you're thinking about using error correcting codes, consider using XOR just as your first thing.
Jorge Velez asks, Bram, what is the next innovation in P2P technology?
Next innovation in P2P technology. I mean, we have cryptocurrencies right now, are kind of cool. There's a lot being done in cryptocurrencies. All kinds of stuff. I mean, again, I have my thing that I'm all excited about, and there's lots of stuff to be built on top of that. I've sort of alluded to some of that, what can be done there, which really has not been built yet. So you have this kind of big open field of cool things you can do with cryptocurrencies. It was definitely a change in the field, that the field of cryptography felt a little stale for a while, that it's like we knew these basic things that could be done. It didn't seem like there was much more to do. We weren't sure how to accomplish anything. And then Bitcoin came along. It's like, oh, Nakamoto consensus. And then all of a sudden, all kinds of interesting, cool problems turned up everywhere. So yeah, it's kind of a big open field right now. It's getting farther along than it was before, but definitely lots of cool stuff to do.
So Bram, how can we improve education?
How can we improve education? Okay, so this is a question I asked for. So Scott Aronson was on before, and I thought Scott got much more interesting questions than I got, so I wanted to get some of his questions. If you look at like what studies of education have indicated, it's sort of depressing. It says nothing works, or nothing vaguely within the norms of what people do seems to make much of any difference. The things that make a big difference, if you study like kids in Africa and stuff, where you can actually do studies of what makes things better or worse without ethics boards telling you you're a horrible person for doing this. There, it turns out medical interventions make a big difference. Like different like reading materials, different teaching styles, blah, 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 doesn't matter. Above some minimum threshold that you almost always do when you have a teacher in the classroom, it doesn't matter. And outside of certain things that we can't seem to control, it doesn't matter. It seems in literate societies, people become literate a lot more easily, but changing, you have to like change the whole environment someone lives in order for that to happen. Like if you move from one country to another, it can make a difference. But twiddling with what you're doing in this classroom a few hours a day, hardly seems to make much of a difference. But if you deworm the students, that can make them better. If you make sure they're not like iodine deficient, that can make things better, right? There's certain things along these lines that you can do. For like, what could we do for students in the United States today who are rarely ever like horribly malnourished, don't really need deworming? Like, what could we do here? There are two kind of obvious things. One of them is a bit of a bully point for mine. I am horribly lactose intolerant. Lactose intolerance tends to not be taken all that seriously. I think mostly because white people have a long history of their ancestors sucking on cow titties and tend to not be lactose intolerant. So they don't really take lactose intolerance very seriously as actually a pretty racist thing, truth be known. The 2/3 of the human race is lactose intolerant. It's just kind of the norm. And yet, they give milk to every single fucking student every day. They're just like poisoning the damn students. And most students don't even have the option for lactose-free milk. Making food lactose-free hardly costs anything. It's like you add a teeny bit of enzyme, you let it sit around. It's not a big deal. Like, it's very, very cheap. It should be the default everywhere. And that should be just the standard, that like all the milk, if not all the food in general, that's served to students is lactose free. You don't even have to make it non-dairy. Just do this lacto-fermentation process. It makes almost everything exactly the same except for like cheese. I mean, making cheese might be a little different out of lactose-free milk. But for the most part, just use lactose-free milk everywhere. And the students, particularly the students of color, will be like not in chronic pain from gastrointestinal distress, and they'll probably do better in school. This was a big problem for me. Another one that's even more general and even more stupid is don't make the students sleep deprived. Like, I don't know, it's so weird how everyone's like so big. All the parenting fashions in the United States, they'll do anything to get their kids into Harvard. Everything they do in life is about getting their kid into Harvard, except letting their kid sleep in, because those bastards need to learn discipline, right? Like, and it's particular. And when you talk to people about it, the excuse that's given, and it's really just excuses like, oh, bus schedules. What literally, that's what people say when you rant to school people about it. And it's like, even if you take that seriously, it's like, okay, here in California, okay, whatever, let's pretend like it's super, super important that we keep the bus budgets under control, that this is like the most important thing in the world. We still have this thing where it's a bit staggered, right? Where the younger students get in earlier and the older students get in later. Sorry, so the younger students get in later and the older students get in early. How about we just flip that around, right? How about we make it so that the young students who can't get to school on their own are brought in early when working parents don't have work yet and can actually bring them in and then go to work afterwards. And then the older students who can get themselves in on their own get to sleep in and come in, later. It's the same bus thing, and people don't take it seriously. It's so weird, and it seems to be just this like power thing over teenagers, that you make them sleep deprived just to have power over them. It's stupid. Anyway, the people do get much better grades when they're not falling asleep in class. Who would have thunk it? So that's my rants about how to improve education. There are other smaller things like in math, right? So. Now, to be fair, when I was in high school, I thought, math could be improved a lot, but it's not like phys ed or social studies or foreign languages, which were just not even on the same reservation as a proper course for that. Foreign languages, just make everybody spend half an hour a day using Duolingo. They'll do a much better job of learning foreign languages than whatever it is the teachers are doing in those classes. But for math, I have really kind of minor nits in some sense. I mean, what's being taught is vaguely in the vicinity of what I would consider a math curriculum, but there are some big screw-ups. Like probability should be taught much younger, particularly Bayesian probability and priors, and what impact this has on your life is a thing that affects people's normal everyday decisions and is important for them to know. Complex numbers should be taught much younger. They should get rid of all the algebra bullshit when describing complex numbers and say, okay, so a real is a point on the line, a complex number is a point on the plane, and just explain geometrically what addition and multiplication do to complex numbers. And then people actually understand that shit without getting all upset about you can't have a square root of 1 because that's imaginary, yada, yada, yada. That's just taught poorly. And what's really weird is I've told people about this, and often they haven't even known about the geometric interpretation of complex numbers, even after having gone through college math. It's like, what are people doing here? It's like, this is the way mathematicians think about it. Why can't we just teach it that way? Anyway, that's a small point compared to how about letting people get enough sleep that they're actually functional.
Okay, a couple questions related to Astral Codex 10. How did Bram Cohen and Slate-Star Codex or Astral Codex 10 get to know each other?
I was just reading Slate-Star Codex back in the day. That was a great blog. I really like this like very nuanced, like, okay, I'm gonna talk about a controversial topic and I'm gonna have this like very nuanced opinion, which might make everybody upset. Maybe, hopefully, we can actually manage to invoke the Allman agreement theorem and have some productive discussion here.
Okay. So that was Johannes Schläger's question, by the way. I forgot to say that. And Martin again asks, what are your major disagreements with Scott? Are there any criticisms of Scott that you found valid and interesting?
I would say usually when Scott writes a long post, I'll have some disagreements with what he's saying, which is, I think, to be expected. If you're writing about a controversial topic and you're really willing to dive into the weeds and say what you think about all of it, like almost everyone is going to disagree with quite a bit of what you say. Given Scott's willingness to engage in it, by the same token, there are very few things where I feel like I have a big fundamental disagreement with Scott. For kind of similar reasons, that whatever Scott's writing about, there's plenty that I can find to agree with what he's saying there. So there are definitely controversial topics around drugs and cancel culture and things like that, that I have, potentially very controversial opinions about, or opinions that are controversial in some circles anyway. But on those ones, I usually mostly agree with Scott. An interesting thing, I would say, the closest thing to a disagreement is I asked Scott at one point, have you gotten your buprenorphine certification? And he said, no. I said, why not? And he said, because I'm a horrible person. and I didn't know what to say to that. I mean, Scott convinced me that if I were a physician, which I'm not, I do not have the ability to drop everything and become a physician. That's not an option for me. But as of several years ago, it's getting better now, but as of several years ago, if you were a physician, you had this opportunity to save more human life than you probably would in the entire rest of your career over the next few years by getting your buprenorphine license and just handing that shit out like candy. Just max out the number of people you could give it to. And even if you made a few screw-ups and people who you gave it to or took on so many patients that you didn't do the greatest job of taking care of all of them, the pent-up demand for this life-saving medication was so great that you would be doing a huge amount of good by doing this, much more than you normally would, because usually when you're a doctor, if you don't treat a patient, someone else will. And that was a case where that was not happening, and people were dying as a result. So I don't know, I kind of maybe could harsh on Scott for not having done that, but he seemed to be harshing on himself about it already. So I'm not really sure why he wasn't doing that.
Okay. Schlurkin asks, regarding 3D puzzles, how much of ability in this domain is innate versus learned? Are there any techniques, even including just doing a lot of 3D puzzles, that increase 3D visualization ability?
So a really interesting thing here. I am cognitively very weird that my 2D visualization ability is kind of bad, kind of horrible. Well, I mean, maybe not horrible compared to the general public. Maybe, kind of normal compared to the general public, but definitely compared to other puzzle people, it's pretty pathetic. Where my 3D visualization ability is notably extremely ridiculously good. So a good story here is there was a test of there's these tests of which of these figures are the same, right? So there's a 3D thingamabobber, and there's a bunch of other ones that look very similar. Basically, the same thing in other handednesses and rotations and such. So typically, this is done where you have it's just 3 segments, and so the 2 tails are differing lengths, and so there's 2 handednesses of the thing, right? So, so I tried doing this and I was slow, and like, that's weird. I'm good at visualization. Why am I being slow here? And so I tried. I tried actually practicing it, and I sped up, but I was still pretty slow. And then I read people talking about it, and they're like, yeah, the amount of time it takes people to do it is dependent on exactly how many degrees it was rotated, right? That they could see people's time to compare was based on how much the image had been rotated. That people seem to actually spend time in their brain rotating it back. Like, what are you talking about? And then I looked, and I hadn't noticed that it was literally the same image rotated. I thought I was looking for full 3-dimensional reorientations, which is actually a trick that many people can't do at all. And yet I found that much more obvious than this much more simple, just rotate the image. So a bit of misdirection that I guess only applied to me there. But it is this weird thing that my visualization is extremely 3D. A thing that I and other puzzle people have noticed, there seems to be a special thing for 3-dimensional stuff. So my friend Nick Baxter. So there are 2 people, maybe more, but there are 2 people who I'm going to mention this story, who go back and forth between doing mechanical puzzles and doing puzzle championships. That Nick Baxter and Weihua Huang. So Nick was at the puzzle championships, and he was on the USA B team, and Weihua was on the USA team. And that's 5 people on a team. So one time, one of the sets of questions was mechanical. It had a 3-dimensional component to it. So it was 5 puzzles, 5 people. So you hand a puzzle to each person. Nick starts working on it. Do. He finishes it. No one else had finished yet, and so he took another one from someone else and do. Finished it. He wound up solving all 5 of them before anyone else solved a single one. And he spoke to Weihua afterwards, and Weihua had the same experience on the USA team. Now, you could say that these people are much more practiced at these kinds of things, but I don't think so. Like, there are other hints, like when puzzles are posted online, some people I know, post puzzles, and I commented once, all your 3D ones are like really super trivial. And and I was like, yeah, I feel that way too, but other people don't seem to think so. It's all like, can you just rotate this in your head kind of things. I think, although it can be trained, there's quite a bit of innate talent here. And I suspect that, and this is kind of borne out by research, that at least really narrowly, how well can you rotate objects in 3 dimensions seems to be this separate direction of intelligence that's not super well correlated with other things. I suspect it's just much easier to measure than other things, that there's many different cognitive centers in the brain. The thing is, most of them, if they don't work super well, you can kind of cover it with other stuff. like you have different reasoning abilities. You just sort of shuffle over here or there, or use your different abilities. 3D is very hard to cover for if that one super specialized thing isn't super great at it. I mean, how good can you visualize 4 dimensions? Probably not at all. If you're like the vast, like all but 1 in somewhere between 10 million and a billion people, you can't visualize 4D worth a damn at all. There are legends of people who can do it very well, which is astounding. But even as someone who visualizes 3D very well, my 4D is kind of crap. I just think by analogy, kind of, or just sort of in cross sections, and mix and match what cross section I'm thinking of at any given time. So if you can't visualize 4D at all, what makes you think that, if you lost your super specialized hardware for doing 3D, you could do it worth a damn at all? Probably you couldn't. It would probably just be completely hopeless. And of course, we can very easily generate tests for 3D because we can actually build things and move them around and see what they do. And even someone who isn't very gifted at 3D visualization is capable of pulling off that exercise and generating a quiz for someone who is very, very good at it. So so I think 3D happenstance is something that's particularly easy to measure and a particularly specialized brain function, which makes it a very hard thing to train for specifically. But practice helps. Practice is great. I think mechanical puzzles are great because it is something that you have these cognitive centers in your brain having to do with your hands, which are very close, I think, to the 3D things. And actually manipulating mechanical puzzles with your hands makes that work, which is activating cognitive things that you can't do if you're just sitting around imagining stuff. If you want to get better at 3D mechanical stuff, my suggestion is buy a bunch of mechanical puzzles and play with them. I have a whole bunch of ones that are really, really big on pulling out interesting aspects of 3D. Rubik's Cube works great. That's the classic kind of a thing. Learn a bunch of, try and solve a Rubik's Cube for yourself, learn a bunch of sequences with it, get good at that kind of visualization. It's still kind of heavy on the orthogonal motion, but does have some reorientation going on in there. So that's about as much of a suggestion as I have there.
Chulikin asks another one. You have been impactful in academia without being an academic. Only similar modern person I can think of who does this too is Jeremy Howard. Any advice for walking this path?
Oh man, when I've written papers, it's kind of been an accident. That wasn't really the plan to begin with so much. There's the WalkSat paper, which came out when I was in high school. I'm kind of a wayward mathematician. It's society tries to be set up to take people like me and steer them into academia, right? And I think in some ways, if certain things had been different, I'd have been very happy in academia. I'm not a very materialistic person. If I had been able to do great things and just get paid well enough to be super comfortable and have a low stress life, that in many ways would be great. I couldn't deal with school. It just wasn't going to happen. I don't know how useful this is to other people. I kind of feel like I was supposed to be in academia and fled, and that's why I've had some impact on academia anyway. So I don't know, and I haven't been trying to be impactful in academia. It's just when I work on things that I just kind of find interesting, or things that relate to my work that's come up in academia. I did this one thing when I was in high school where I was too young to be busy working. And then Chia stuff has thankfully actually had a bunch of things that were publishable that came up with it. So that's been fun and been good to have some publications there. I did one thing that was a write-up of Bittorrent, which was, a write-up of my interesting stuff in the field, although that's more kind of, bringing some grotty engineering to academia. There's certain, I'm not sure what grotty engineering things qualify something for writing about in academia. I'm not clear on that, but Bittorrent clearly qualifies. I did once come up with a result. This is very unheralded, but there's this interesting question in math, in pure math. If you ever kind of were supposed to become a mathematician and didn't, you have this, insecurity. Could I have acted as a real mathematician doing real math, like pure math? So there's this really interesting question of if you have n-dimensional space, how many points can you put into into that number of dimensions, such that which are non-collinear, such that every triangle of 3 of them is acute. And so some kid actually beat the Ramsey theory type solutions for this and by showing constructively that if you have a set of points in n dimensions, that you can construct a set of 2n points in n plus 2 dimensions. And I thought this was really fascinating. As it happens, I was commuting to work by driving at the time, so I spent the next month during my drive to and from work, which was like 2 hours every day, thinking about this problem in my head, just kind of visualizing it. And after that, I figured out how to increase. Technically, the write-up I did was of increasing. If you increase by 5 dimensions, you increase by a factor of 6. So it's actually doing one iteration of the doubling in 2 dimensions by adding 2 dimensions, and then another iteration of tripling in 3 dimensions. Actually, it's pretty easy to do better than that, because you could just keep adding more tripling in 3 dimensions afterwards, and this gets you better asymptotics as you go up. Anyway, related to I wasn't even trying to showboat, like just doing this in my head. It's just something I can do. Yeah, kind of hard to teach having those magical abilities. But I did a write-up of this, posted it to my blog. Unfortunately, that's the exact same day the kid who'd posted the other result posted a much stronger result. I think the technique I came up with actually is worthy of study in its own right, because it actually leads to this super interesting question. If you have triples of points in 3 dimensions, how many of them can you have such that if you take 2 points from one triangle and 1 point from another triangle, all of those are acute, even though the triple from one triangle could be obtuse? That's a really interesting question. It's on the verge of, I don't even know if it's a finite amount or not. Anyway, I was really, even though I didn't write it up properly to get published, because it's a different technique for working on something, might be worthy of publishing on its own. I didn't do that, but it made me very happy to actually have succeeded in figuring out a real pure math result. Even though like the proofs of space in Chia, which I personally came up with, are like very much a real computer science result. But
yeah. Let's just take a couple more. Bram, you asked genetic engineering of humans, and you have a vote for that from Schlorkin as well. So what's your take on that?
Oh, yeah. People have this misunderstanding of what evolution really does. That we humans, we carry around mutational load. All living creatures carry around mutational load. There aren't really genes that are good. That almost any gene that's actually good would have long since spread throughout the whole human genome long ago. But there are most definitely genes that are bad. Almost all new mutations that you have in your body are neutral to bad to very bad. And you know, at some point, at some level of mutational load, the amount of cleanup, you know, standard deviation is the square root of the number of things. So the number of mutations that you get in each generation is kind of a fixed amount. When that gets big enough that the square root of the amount of bad mutations that you have is sort of comparable to the number of new mutations that you get each generation, it balances out, and you just have this mutational. So if you want to germline edit the human to be better, what you can do is take a zygote and go, okay, well, what are the rare things in this? We took 1 million people of the same ethnicity, ran a full genome sequence on them. What mutations, what variants do not occur in more than 1 in 1 million of these people, right? What have we never seen within this ethnicity before? And you just assume that all of those that you've never seen before are ones that only occurred in like 1 out of these 1 million people or something. Just assume those are bad and just fix them, right? And here, you're not really doing very much to this person. This is something which we unfortunately don't have the gene editing technology to do this today, because it's actually a lot of gene edits, but we will in the future. But we have the information science tools to do it today. With that caveat about that I said about people of the same ethnicity, that's actually kind of interesting. But that's doable today. I think if you did this, no one's done this experiment even on animals yet, because we don't have the tools to do it. I think if you did this, you would just have a healthier person. You would have someone who is recognizably the person they would have been before, but they're just, healthier, smarter, taller, longer lived, less chances of cancer. Actually, a lot less chances of cancer than they would otherwise have been. This is something that I think in the future will go from being impossible today to there's going to be a period of time where there will be social unrest, where these modifications are available to rich people but not poor people, which is going to really make people edgy. And then it's going to go to, actually pretty rapidly after that, because there's no physics reason why this can't be super cheap, it's going to go to being available to everyone, at which point it will be very rapidly considered really, really stupid to not do it. So that's where I foresee all of that going. If you actually want to look for genes that are good in some sense, which gets into a much edgier potential topic, you get you have dangers there. Like you could look at like lactose intolerance, which I brought up before. We actually know genes that cause lactose tolerance. So that's something you could select for today, actually. It's a totally reasonable thing. If you have a bunch of zygotes today and you are, and you're trying to pick between them because you're doing in vitro, my recommendation would be pick the one that has lactose that's not lactose intolerant. This is pretty reasonable. But if you didn't know what these things did, if you were looking at just like genes that were spreading rapidly through the human genome, it would be very easy to say, oh, well, we don't know what these things do, so we're just going to take all the things that seem to be spreading rapidly. You could wind up having like a dozen variants that all of which improve lactose tolerance, but probably if you have all of them at once, quite likely is getting you a whole lot of completely unnecessary side effects of the lot of them. You only really want the best of them that really works well, and we don't know which one that is. And if you're looking at like where are there good genes in the human genome, you can look for things that are spreading rapidly throughout the human race. And there are such things. What do they do? In the vast majority of cases, we have no clue. We don't know what these things do. They're doing something because they're spreading rapidly. So in some sense, they are good. But which ones of them are redundant with each other? We don't know. What are the phenotypic changes? We have no clue. We don't know what these things are doing. We can just see that there are these segments that don't vary much between people. So they came from a relatively recent same ancestor across all of them. So you could start going, well, we're just going to take those and turn those on because they're good. I don't know what they do, but they're good. So you run the risk of turning on redundant things. You run the risk of turning on things that actually you wouldn't like if you did know what they did. You also run the risk of things that are potentially make people edgy. Like among these genes that have been spreading rapidly, some of the phenotypic effects are things like blonde hair and blue eyes. Blue eyes have been spreading very, very rapidly, and saying, oh, well, we should make everybody have blue eyes because it's better is not a popular opinion. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But if you were to go with the heuristic of let's make people have genes that are spreading rapidly, that is something that you would probably wind up doing. If you want to be super tentative about things that would be good to have, I'm in favor of getting rid of wisdom teeth. Interesting bit of trivia about wisdom teeth. Mexican Aboriginals, Aboriginal Native Americans from the region now known as Mexico, none of them have any wisdom teeth. They just don't grow in. And those are peoples who lived off of a kind of modern diet, off of mostly corn for a much longer time than we have, and had, all these problems with tooth overgrowth, and they adapted by not having these wisdom teeth, which is this problem that we modern humans have, that we're not, that our diet is such that our wisdom teeth overgrow and cause all these problems and have to be surgically removed. So it would seem like a really good idea to go, hey, we kind of have a pretty good idea what that does phenotypically. It's not anything bad or dangerous or controversial. We should just, make sure that people don't have any goddamn wisdom teeth. Oddly enough, we don't actually know the genetics of wisdom teeth. It doesn't seem to have been studied, which seems completely insane to me. I wish that would be done.
All right, well, everyone, this is a chance to unmute and applaud. Thank you very much. I enjoyed that. And we have more. We have some